Why is it that when someone else suffers, you feel it as if the wound was carved into your own skin? Why do you wake at night thinking about words you couldn't say, apologies you never owed, burdens you were never meant to carry? Empaths live with this quiet, invisible weight, an ache that doesn't belong to them, yet clings to their soul like shadow. It is not simply kindness. It is not merely compassion. It is a haunting sense of responsibility, as if the pain of others is your personal failure, as if every broken heart and every silent scream demands that you rise, heal, and sacrifice yourself. And when you cannot fix it, when their wounds stay unhealed, you turn the knife inward. You tell yourself you are not enough. But what if this isn't true? What if the pain you carry is not a curse, but a mirror? What if this constant ache is not meant to destroy you, but to awaken you? Before you can free others, you must ask, what chains are you still locked in? Why does their pain feel like your duty? And who told you that love meant surrendering yourself until nothing remains? Many empaths live under a subtle yet powerful illusion that their ability to feel deeply is automatically a responsibility to carry, heal, and resolve what they sense. It begins innocently, even beautifully, because the human instinct to connect is one of the most profound gifts we possess. But over time, this gift morphs into a burden when it is filtered through the conditioning of family, society, and relationships that equate love with sacrifice. The empath is often told, directly or indirectly, that their role is to absorb pain, to keep the peace, to smooth over conflict even at the cost of their own well-being. This belief is not born from empathy itself, but from misunderstanding what empathy is supposed to be. Empathy is the ability to understand and resonate with another person's feelings. Responsibility is the act of taking ownership for those feelings. Confusing the two is where the suffering begins. Because the moment empathy is mistaken for obligation, the empath stops being a witness and becomes a prisoner to every storm around them. Footnote: Machiavellian empathy, the empath starts being a witness and becomes a prisoner to every storm around them. They lose the right to step back, to say no, to protect themselves, because their identity becomes wrapped in the illusion that their worth is measured by how much they can absorb for others. This confusion is deeply tied to early conditioning. Many empaths grew up in environments where their sensitivity was weaponized against them. Perhaps they were told they were too emotional or too dramatic, yet in the same breath, they were expected to be the emotional caretaker for others. A child who constantly feels the moods of their parents may begin to think, if I can just keep everyone calm, maybe I'll be safe. If I can anticipate their anger, soothe their sadness, or carry their burdens, maybe I won't be abandoned. This survival strategy formed in childhood grows into adulthood as a core identity. The empath learns to ignore their own needs, to silence their own voice, because their sense of worth is entirely tied to how well they manage the emotional chaos of others. This is not empathy in its pure form. This is survival. It is an internalized rule. I must be responsible for everyone else's feelings, or I am unworthy of love. And once that belief takes root, it shapes how empaths approach friendships, work, and intimate relationships. They unconsciously seek situations where they can play the healer, the fixer, the peacemaker, often without realizing they are setting themselves up for exhaustion and heartbreak. Philosophical insight can help expose the flaw in this mindset. Machiavelli, though often considered cold and ruthless, made a point that resonates here. Kindness without boundaries often invites exploitation. In politics and in life, when people see that someone will endlessly give, they begin to expect it as a natural order, not as a gift. Empaths who confuse empathy with responsibility frequently find themselves in this trap. They believe they are acting from love, but in reality, they are trapped in a cycle where their generosity is taken for granted, not valued. Emotional maturity demands the recognition that not every burden belongs to you, and not every storm requires your intervention. The misconception arises because empaths often believe that stepping back is cruelty, when in fact stepping back can be the highest form of love. By refusing to carry what does not belong to you, you allow others to face their lessons, their accountability, and their growth. Interfering in their suffering, though it may feel compassionate, can actually rob them of the very transformation they need. And in the process, you empty yourself. leaving nothing but fatigue and resentment. The psychological toll of this misconception is heavy. When empaths take on responsibility for every pain they encounter, they live in a constant state of hypervigilance. They scan rooms for unspoken tension. They absorb words between the lines. They notice shifts in tone, posture, and silence. Instead of experiencing life directly, they are always managing the invisible weight of others. This often leads to burnout, depression, and feelings of deep inadequacy, because no matter how much they give, it is never enough. They cannot control outcomes, yet they blame themselves for the wounds they couldn't heal or the conflicts they couldn't prevent. This inner conflict intensifies when the empath meets people who exploit their nature, individuals who see sensitivity as weakness and kindness as a resource to exploit. The empath, still tied to the belief that they are responsible for others' happiness, bends further, trying harder, giving more, while the other person takes without limit. The result is often emotional exhaustion and the haunting belief that something is fundamentally wrong with them for not being able to save everyone. At its core, this misconception strips empaths of their autonomy. They begin to see themselves not as individuals with desires, boundaries, and inner worlds, but as tools for the emotional well-being of others. Their life becomes reactive rather than intentional. The misconception tells them you must respond to every tear, every conflict, every disappointment, or else you are unworthy. This belief system is not compassion. It is bondage disguised as virtue. And because society often romanticizes the idea of the selfless giver, empaths may even be praised for this self-erasure. They are told they are angels, healers, or good souls, yet beneath those compliments lies an unspoken demand. Keep giving, keep sacrificing, keep carrying what is not yours. The empath feels simultaneously validated and trapped, unable to escape because the very behavior that destroys them is also what brings them fleeting recognition. The cycle reinforces itself, making it even harder to see that true empathy does not mean rescuing others at the cost of yourself. The irony is that empaths often pride themselves on seeing truths others overlook, yet they struggle to see this truth, that empathy without boundaries is unsustainable. The human heart is not designed to carry endless pain, especially pain that does not belong to it. When an empath internalizes everyone else's suffering, they blur the line between compassion and codependency. They stop respecting the individuality of others by assuming that their intervention is required. But real empathy honors autonomy. Real empathy says, I see your pain, I feel your pain, but I trust you enough to face it. Without this perspective, the empath not only weakens themselves, but also weakens the people they are trying to help. It is as if by holding someone else's weight indefinitely, you prevent them from ever developing the muscles to stand. This is the tragic paradox of the empath's misconception. In their quest to heal, they sometimes become the obstacle to healing. To break free from this conflict, empaths must first recognize how deeply rooted the misconception is. It is not a simple mistake, but a worldview shaped by years of reinforcement, trauma, and social conditioning. It feels noble to sacrifice. It feels righteous to bear the weight of others. But nobility at the expense of selfhood is hollow. What looks like love is often fear. The fear of rejection, the fear of being unworthy unless constantly giving, the fear of what might happen if they stop rescuing and let the world unfold on its own terms. Facing this truth requires courage, because it asks the empath to step out of the role that has defined them for most of their lives. It asks them to separate empathy from obligation, compassion from self-erasure, and love from martyrdom. Only then can they begin to see that their gift is not meant to enslave them, but to illuminate the human experience in a way that uplifts both themselves and others without chains. You know the feeling of being the one who always listens, the one who always understands, the one who cannot turn away from another's tears. At first it feels like a gift, a way to connect with people more deeply than most ever will, but over time, that gift begins to feel like a silent demand. Friends, family, partners, even strangers sense your openness, your ability to absorb pain like a sponge, and they come to you with their storms. You cannot say no, because you feel their sorrow in your bones. Their trembling becomes your trembling, their despair becomes your despair, and suddenly, you are carrying not only the weight of your own life, but the burdens of everyone around you. It starts small, a conversation here, a favor there, But before long you realize that every room you enter feels heavier because of what you take upon yourself. And the cruel part is, they rarely see the cost. To them, you are simply the strong one, the one who understands. But deep down, you are crumbling under the very empathy they admire. Think about the friend who always calls you at midnight when their world is falling apart. You answer because to ignore them feels like betrayal. You listen, you comfort, you advise, but when you hang up, you lie awake in bed staring at the ceiling, carrying their sorrow as if it were your own. You replay their words, you wonder if you said enough, you wonder if you could have done more. They fall asleep lighter, but you fall asleep restless, haunted by a burden you didn't create. Or the family member who mistakes your kindness for responsibility, unloading years of bitterness, regret, or blame onto you, as though you were the one holding the pieces of their life together. You don't protest, because protesting feels selfish. You swallow your exhaustion, you nod, you comfort, and you tell yourself that this is love. But a quiet resentment grows, a whisper in your mind saying, "Who carries me when I am the one collapsing?" And the answer, too often, is no one. Romantic relationships add another layer to this silent suffering. You find yourself drawn to partners who need saving, partners whose wounds are open and unhealed, partners who mistake your empathy for infinite capacity to forgive and endure. At first, you believe your love will heal them. You believe that if you just stay, if you just give enough, if you just love harder, their brokenness will finally mend. But the reality is crueler. They begin to rely on you as a crutch, not as a partner. They take your energy, your patience, your tenderness, without offering balance or reciprocity. And when you reach your limit and dare to voice your pain, they turn the guilt back on you. They say, if you really loved me, you wouldn't give up on me. And because you are an empath, those words pierce your soul. You stay longer than you should. You give more than you can, because you cannot bear the thought of being the one who adds to their pain. Yet in the process, you lose yourself, piece by piece, until you barely recognize the person staring back in the mirror. There are also the subtle, everyday moments that reveal this pattern. Sitting in a crowded room, you pick up on the one person whose smile doesn't reach their eyes, and you feel their sadness like a knife in your chest. In conversations, you notice the hesitation, the hidden meaning behind words, and you internalize it as if it were your responsibility to address it. At work, you volunteer for tasks that no one else wants, not because you have the time or energy, but because you cannot stand to see someone else overwhelmed. Even in silence, you carry the weight of others. You walk through life as if tethered to invisible strings, each one pulling you in a different direction, each one demanding your presence, your care, your sacrifice. And when you finally collapse under the weight, no one understands why. They only saw your strength. They only saw how much you could carry. They never saw the nights you cried alone, the exhaustion you swallowed, the way your heart grew heavier with every unspoken burden. The transformation often begins with a painful realization: no matter how much you give, it will never be enough to save someone who is not ready to save themselves. You remember the countless times you poured your soul into someone else's healing, only to watch them return to the same destructive patterns. You remember the nights you begged silently in your heart for them to choose differently, for them to see their worth, for them to let go of their pain. And when they didn't, you blamed yourself. You thought, maybe I didn't say the right thing, maybe I wasn't supportive enough, maybe I failed them. But slowly, painfully, you begin to see the truth. Their healing was never yours to carry. Their journey was never yours to walk. You were not responsible for their choices, and your love could never replace the work they refused to do for themselves. This realization doesn't erase the guilt immediately, but it plants a seed of clarity. You start to see that love is not about drowning with someone in their suffering. It is about standing on the shore, offering your hand, and letting them decide whether they will swim. And yet, even as you awaken to this truth, the guilt lingers like a shadow. Every time you set a boundary, a voice in your head whispers that you are selfish. Every time you say no, you feel like you are abandoning someone. Every time you step back, you worry that you are cold or uncaring. This is the paradox empaths live with, the desire to protect themselves colliding with the fear of being seen as heartless. But over time, you begin to test the boundaries. You say no once, and though the guilt burns, you survive. You set a limit, and though the world resists, you remain standing. And with each small act of self-preservation, you begin to reclaim a piece of yourself. You realize that love without limits is not love, it is surrender. And you start to understand that protecting your soul is not cruelty, but necessity. The most relatable experience of all is the quiet, private one, the moment when you finally see the cost of your self-erasure. You look at yourself and realize how much of your life you have lived for others, how many dreams you set aside to carry someone else's burden, how many times you silenced your voice to soothe another's storm. You realize you have been living half a life defined not by your desires but by your fears. And in that moment, something shifts. The guilt does not disappear, but it begins to loosen its grip. You see that the world will not collapse if you stop carrying it. You see that people will either rise to their own challenges or they will not. And it was never your duty to make that choice for them. And for the first time, you begin to breathe, not for others but for yourself. True strength for an empath does not arrive with fanfare or dramatic confrontation. It begins in silence. It is the quiet realization, often whispered late at night when the world has gone still, that you can no longer continue living as a vessel for everyone else's storms. At first, this realization frightens you, because strength has always meant endurance to you, enduring others' moods, enduring others' chaos, enduring the endless demands that came with being the one who feels everything. But awakening redefines strength. It shows you that true resilience is not measured by how much pain you can carry, but by how fiercely you can protect the space within you that is meant for your own life. It is the strength to stand unshaken in the middle of a storm, not because you have absorbed it, but because you have finally learned to let it pass through you without chaining it to your chest. This awakening does not make you less compassionate. On the contrary, it purifies compassion, stripping it of guilt, obligation, and martyrdom, and leaving behind a love that is steady because it is whole. Imagine scars that once felt like proof of weakness, now becoming emblems of survival. Each scar tells a story of how you carried what was not yours, how you bent under the weight of responsibility, how you were used, misunderstood, or even exploited, yet still you remained. In the awakening, those scars transform into a kind of armor, not a hardness that shuts the world out, but a resilience that says, I know what nearly broke me, and I will not allow it to claim me again. The empath's strength is not in closing off or hardening, but in remaining soft while learning to protect that softness with wisdom. It is realizing that sensitivity is not fragility, it is clarity, a heightened awareness of life that becomes powerful only when directed wisely. The scars, once seen as marks of inadequacy, begin to glow with quiet dignity. They remind you that you survived, that you endured, and that now you have the choice to live differently. Solitude becomes the teacher in this awakening. When you step away from the endless noise of others' demands, you discover something you had forgotten, the sound of your own voice. In the silence of solitude, your thoughts are not interrupted, your emotions are not borrowed, your energy is not drained by anyone else's expectations. At first, this silence can feel empty, even terrifying, because you have been conditioned to believe your value lies in being needed. But as you sit longer in solitude, you begin to notice its richness. You feel the slow return of your own dreams, your own desires, your own clarity about what you want your life to mean. The quiet becomes a mirror, reflecting back the parts of yourself that were buried under layers of responsibility. You begin to see that you are not just a healer of others. You are also a being worthy of joy, creation, and freedom. This realization is the spark of inner awakening, the reminder that your soul has its own path, separate from the storms you once believed you had to fix. There is a shift in imagery that defines this new strength. You are no longer the sponge that absorbs every drop of sorrow. Instead, you become a light, steady and unshaken, illuminating without being consumed. Light does not take on the darkness it touches, it simply reveals it, allowing others to see what they must confront themselves. The empath who awakens realizes this. Your role is not to carry another's darkness, but to shine in such a way that they are inspired to face it. Your presence becomes healing not because you bleed for others, but because you stand whole, radiating clarity, boundaries, and compassion in balance. The imagery of light carries with it a deep truth. Light is strongest when it is fed, when it has fuel, when it is not smothered. Your self-respect, your solitude, your silence, these are the fuel that allow your light to shine without flickering under the weight of everyone else's shadows. Awakening also means learning the sacred power of no. For so long, no felt cruel to you, a rejection that could harm, an act of selfishness. But in the awakened state, no becomes an affirmation of life, a declaration that your energy is precious, your soul is sacred, and your time is not infinite. Saying no does not diminish your empathy, it strengthens it. Because when you protect your energy, you are able to give from a place of abundance rather than depletion. You learn that boundaries are not walls that isolate you, they are doors that you control, deciding when and how to open them. And as you practice saying no, you discover that the people who truly value you will respect it, while those who only valued your endless giving will fall away. This is painful at first, but it is also liberating. For the first time, you are surrounded not by those who drain you, but by those who honor the fullness of your being. The awakening reveals another truth. You are not responsible for the pace of someone else's growth. You can love them, you can witness them, you can encourage them, but you cannot carry them through the fire they are meant to walk. Trying to do so only leaves you burned and them untransformed. This realization shifts the empath's entire worldview. Instead of asking, how can I save them, you begin to ask, how can I stay whole while loving them? This reframing is everything. It allows you to hold compassion without collapsing, to support without erasing yourself, to love without sacrificing your essence. You begin to trust life more, to trust that everyone has their own path, their own timing, their own lessons. And in trusting this, you free yourself from the impossible task of being responsible for everyone's healing. You step back, not with coldness, but with wisdom. You let others face their own fires while you tend to the flame of your own soul. In this new state of inner strength, you no longer see your sensitivity as a curse, but as a rare kind of sight. You understand the depth of human pain, but you are no longer bound by it. You see the fractures in others, but you no longer mistake them for your duty to repair. Your awakening makes you both softer and stronger at once. Soft enough to love, strong enough to walk away when love becomes self-destruction. The empath who awakens is not a martyr but a mirror, reflecting to others the power of choosing wholeness. You carry your scars with grace, you walk in solitude with peace, you stand in light with dignity, and for the first time your empathy feels like freedom, not chains. When the empath finally reaches the end of this journey, there is a quiet recognition that the responsibility they carried for so long was never theirs to hold. The awakening is not marked by fireworks or loud declarations, but by a deep stillness that feels like coming home after years of wandering in a storm. For so long you believed your value was tied to how much you could give, how much you could sacrifice, how much of yourself you could erase in service of others. But now you see that your worth is not measured in the weight of others' burdens. It is intrinsic, unshakable, rooted in your very existence. This realization changes the way you see the world. Where you once felt chained to every cry, every wound, every shadow, you now recognize the difference between witnessing pain and owning it. You realize that love does not demand you to bleed endlessly. Real love, the kind that liberates, begins with the way you hold yourself. It begins with the simple yet radical truth that your soul was never meant to be diminished just to keep others comfortable. There is a new kind of clarity that comes with this awareness. You begin to look at relationships differently. The ones built on extraction, on taking without reciprocity, begin to lose their hold on you. You no longer confuse neediness with love, nor guilt with obligation. You recognize manipulation in all its subtle forms, the sighs that demand your attention, the silence that guilts you into action, the flattery that disguises dependence. Where once you would have bent and yielded, you now stand steady. You understand that your role in life is not to be endlessly available, but to be authentically present in the moments that align with your truth. This shift feels like reclaiming your life inch by inch. The voices that once told you that you were selfish for stepping back now sound hollow, because you have discovered a deeper voice inside you, one that whispers, you are allowed to live for yourself. This voice becomes your compass, guiding you away from cycles of exhaustion and toward a life shaped by self-respect and clarity. The most profound realization in this conclusion is that the revolution you sought was never external. You spent years believing that if you could fix others, heal others, make others whole, the world itself would change. But the real revolution has always been within you. The revolution is in choosing boundaries where there were none. It is in reclaiming silence where there was noise. It is in walking away when staying means erasing yourself. This revolution does not look dramatic to the outside world, but inside, it is everything. It is the tearing down of illusions, the end of martyrdom, the birth of a self that is finally free, and in that freedom you discover something paradoxical. When you stop carrying the world, your empathy becomes more powerful, not less. Because you are no longer giving from emptiness, you are giving from wholeness. You are no longer rescuing to silence your guilt. You are loving from a place of choice. This is the heart of the transformation, realizing that the world is not healed by your suffering, but by your wholeness. As you walk this new path, solitude no longer frightens you. In solitude you find peace rather than emptiness. You begin to understand that being alone does not mean being abandoned. It means being rooted in yourself. From this place of inner stillness, your empathy sharpens. You can hold space for another's pain without absorbing it. You can listen deeply without drowning. You can care profoundly without crossing the line into self-destruction. This balance is the gift of your awakening. It allows you to walk through life with open eyes and an open heart, yet without the chains that once held you captive. And when others notice this change, they may not understand it. They may call you distant, detached, or different. But you know the truth. You are not detached, you are free. You are not distant, you are centered. You are not cold. You are whole, and in that wholeness, your presence becomes a sanctuary. Not because you carry others' pain, but because you radiate the possibility of living without chains. There is also an acceptance that comes with this conclusion, an acceptance of human limitation. You begin to understand that suffering is not yours to erase but part of the human journey that each person must face. You accept that people will make choices, some destructive, some beautiful, and those choices belong to them. You accept that you cannot save everyone, and you no longer see that as failure. It is not your job to rescue, it is your job to live truthfully, to embody the fullness of your being. This acceptance feels like a deep exhale after years of holding your breath. It is the release of a burden you never needed to carry, the surrender of a false duty that kept you imprisoned. With acceptance comes compassion, not the draining compassion of martyrdom, but the steady compassion of a soul that knows its boundaries. You can now say, I love you, but your healing is yours. You can now say, I care for you, but I must also care for me. This is not rejection, it is balance. It is love with clarity, love that does not consume, love that finally sets both you and others free. And so the journey concludes with a simple but profound call to action. Live as if your soul is worth protecting, because it is. Stop carrying what does not belong to you. Stop confusing empathy with obligation. Stop believing that your love must come at the cost of your life. The world does not need another martyr. It needs individuals who are whole, individuals who shine without burning themselves to ash. The revolution is not in how much you can suffer for others, but in how deeply you can honor yourself while still choosing to love. This is the silent, soulful call that remains, to protect your spirit, to value your light, to embody compassion without losing yourself in it. And if you can do this, you will discover that the greatest act of love is not to erase yourself for the sake of others, but to live fully as who you are. In that authenticity, you give the world something far more powerful than sacrifice. You give it truth, and truth is what awakens others more than anything else.